Greetings, brothers and sisters. So I'm going to get to this Pat Tillman story, something that you can watch free in YouTube movies, and I'll talk about this. My wife and I watched it last night. Very important to what happened in Afghanistan. It's a huge piece of the puzzle. I never saw the documentary. I saw trailers for it, and I knew some of the story. But this documentary, it is just the lying of the government and the military is so offensive. And I'll get into that in just a moment because I want to talk about that. And then I have a couple other little clips to get to, and then I want to talk sort of in depth about a few comments, positive comments about experiences people have had from this YouTube channel, which I maybe have alluded to in other videos, but it's something that I've never really talked about in a way that I'm going to talk about it today. And I think it's really important in terms of the future survival of people. It's like something people have to know to endure and to excel in the next phase, the end of this phase and the beginning of a new phase. And to start off with, though, I want to talk about a couple experiences and the animalistic nature of creatures here on planet Earth, the brutality of the food chain and the pecking order. So we have like a back window where our kitchen sink is, a big picture window. And my wife puts out a hummingbird feeder on the window. And we get these cool gray tree frogs, one of my favorite frogs, who come and sit on it. We have a couple of different species of tree frogs, which is really cool. That I'm always into like nature and animals. It was something when I was a kid I wanted to be like a sort of a explorer type of person, right? Like this crocodile hunter from Australia. I didn't like him. He was, I was older when he was popular, but there was this guy called Marlon Perkins. He had this show called Mutual of Omaha, which was an insurance company. They were the primary sponsor. Wild Kingdom. It was on every Saturday, and I just love watching nature shows and going out and interacting with animals. That's, I wanted to travel the world and things like this. I had encyclopedia. My family had an encyclopedia from the Natural Museum of History in New York City. It was, a series of volumes, like it was 20 some odd volumes, 8 or whatever, and it covered a lot of natural animal life. I read the whole thing. I read all the encyclopedias. I used to go to the library. I would get into one animal after another where I would be interested in it. I would do research on it. And I'd go to the library and read as much as I could find on it. I was a young kid, 7, 8, 9 years old. Somewhere I was tested, and I ended up having a reading level of a senior in high school when I was a little kid, because I just, researched and read these books over and over again, different books we had at home on animals and studying animals and all these things. My parents kind of knew I had this interest, and there's the Bronx Zoo was the closest zoo to us. I guess there's probably something in Boston. Where my family lived in Connecticut, we're equidistant away from New York and Boston. My mother and father's families came from New Jersey, just outside of New York City. And we would drive through New York City. It was a 2.5 hour drive, but for my dad and mom, it seemed like forever. I mean, we used to drive to Florida, but these trips were, somehow a big deal for them. I really can't explain it and understand it because I since, have lived in the western part of the country where it takes 10 hours just to drive across one state. Of course, Florida is a long state. But in the Northeast, you can drive through all these big states, in terms of population and history, the New England area and all the way down to Washington, D.C., within a day. And we were 2 hours away from the beach. And I remember these trips were like, like we were taking some epic journey across the world. Of course, I've gone to India maybe 10 or 15. I don't know how many trips I've taken via flight. Probably, I don't know, about 10 maybe. I could probably figure it out. But these are 36-hour trips. And my first trip to India, I moved from Massachusetts. I quit my job and moved to New Mexico. And so driving across the country from Massachusetts to New Mexico was a 5-day drive for me, 4 or 5 days. And I was going across the whole country. And then from there, I flew to Los Angeles, and then from Los Angeles to Taipei, and then from Taipei to Singapore, and then Singapore to New Delhi, where I was supposed to meet Master Charji, who was going on a trip to the Himalayas, and I was going to be a part of that trip. But he had his toe broken, which is a whole story that I'm not going to get into, but interesting. Maybe I'll tell it later in this video, who knows. And so I got to New Delhi, where I was supposed to meet Master Charji's sort of, whatever it was, entourage, and go with him to the Himalayas. He was picking out a area to build an ashram, which ended up being in Satkol. I haven't been to that ashram, but people go there and say it's spectacular, the spiritual energy there. It's like you take a vow of silence when you go in there, and there's no like talking and gossiping and really social interaction. You're just supposed to be there for 3 or 4 days and absorb the condition. But anyways, so I had to fly back from Delhi to what's now called Chennai. It was called Madras back then. They changed the name. Madras was the English name for the city. Anyway, so I got there. It was late. Someone picked me up at the airport and brought me to the New Delhi ashram. I slept for like 2 hours, and I got back on a plane. So the whole trip, after the 4 or 5 days from Massachusetts to New Mexico, where I spent 1 day or 2 days in New Mexico, I put my car in storage, and I got an apartment for what I was going to get back. And then I, got on the plane, and so there was this extended trip. And the plane travel alone was like 2 days, 2.5 days, and I was just exhausted. I got to the ashram, and there was this, meditation hall, and it had a hard marble floor, and I just slept there for like 24 hours, and it was, painful. I was like, there was no, bedding or anything. I just laid down on the floor, sort of collapsed, and there was like, I'd wake up and there'd be group meditations going on, but I was just exhausted from lack of sleep and, going through all these different regions and time zones. There's actually lots of kind of funny and interesting parts of that first story, which first trip to India, but I'll tell that in a later video. But anyways, I traveled all these different places, and my family thought it was like a big deal to drive to New York City that was 2 hours away. And I think I, must have petitioned my family to go to the Bronx Zoo and the Natural Museum of History. I was just fascinated by those places. So I'm like 7, 8 years old. And so we drive to New York City, and instead of checking in the hotel right away, my dad's like, well, why don't we go to the museum right away, right? Let's park on the side of the street here. And we had one of those old-fashioned station wagons, and you could see the luggage in the back of the car, right? And my mom maybe was arguing with my dad, maybe that's not a good idea, something like that. But instead of putting our luggage safely in the hotel, we left it in New York City, where it's in public view, the big windows in the back of one of those large station wagons. And we went to the museum for a couple hours, maybe ate lunch or something, and we came back to the car, and the luggage was gone. And there was this like New Yorker, real classic New Yorker. And he's looking at my dad like, why in the world would you have your your car sitting here where your luggage is visible for the, hundreds of thieves that are going to pass by your car, right? So we didn't get to go to the zoo, and we just turned around and went home, which I was completely bummed about, right? And it was one of the many experiences where I was like, my parents are just completely incompetent. Like I can't, count on them at all for competency. And then we went back maybe a year or two later, and it was just me and my dad. And we went to the Natural Museum of History first, or wherever we were there. And my dad finds this wallet in the parking lot. And so he returns it, which, one of these few moments I was actually kind of proud of my dad. and he returns it, and they were so excited, like it was some miracle that just happened, that in New York City someone returned a wallet. you know that they brought us to the back to these special exhibits and things that other people didn't have access to. So that was an interesting trip. But anyways, I wanted to be a naturalist. And then, later on, I mean, this is something that stuck with me. I still enjoy studying animals, certainly here on the farm, natural life and farm animals. I mean, there's times that, when we first had chickens, I mean, this even happens now. I was, the first homestead, and the chickens have such an interesting society, sort of a social system, and they make a lot of different cool sounds. And like I'd be out doing chores, working on the farm, and I'd be watching the chickens. The next thing you know, I spent an hour studying the chickens, right? I was like, I'd just been watching chickens for like an hour. And even, as when my family and I lived in New Mexico, and I just had, very young kids, we used to go to the Albuquerque Zoo from Santa Fe, and we'd get there early, and there was these Semang apes. I always liked gibbons for some reason, the way that they, these smaller, lesser apes. There's four apes. There's the gorilla, the chimpanzee. Bonobos are also chimpanzees, and orangutans, and gibbons, and Semang apes are a kind of gibbon, a bigger gibbon. And of course, human beings that are, these primates that don't have tails, like monkeys have tails, and then you have these apes that don't. And I always was fascinated with the gibbons and the way that they, had this acrobatic sort of gymnastic way of swinging from branch to branch really quickly. And I enjoy seeing it, especially in these zoos where there's some natural habitat where they can do these things. And in Albuquerque, they had these Semang apes, and in the morning they would have these calls, almost like howler monkeys, right? And they would, they would hoot, and they would make this other sound. I can make the other sound. I think I can still do it. I'm gonna try it. Whoop, 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 whoop. My dogs are going nuts. But anyways, I could make the sound. We used to go with my kids and run over there and check out the Semang apes. Buddy's staring at me right now, my dog Buddy. He's like, what was that? So anyways, this is going to tie into the Pat Tillman story in just a bit. There's one other piece to this. So when I grew up, there was this huge old house we had that had like 6 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms on the top floor, which was a third floor, sort of a big attic. And in one of the bedrooms, there was these 2 monster closets that, they weren't like a full adult size where you could walk in to the closet, but they were about my height as a kid. And they ran along the sort of the roof line, so they were really long, deep closets full of storage and things. And in this one room, it was sort of a storage room, and there was next to the closets, and there was these 2 maps. I don't know where my family got them, but they were bigger than me. They were taller than me. They were probably, 4 or 5 feet tall. And one was of Africa and one was of India. And and they were topical. They made out of plastic, and they had, they had mountain ranges on them and things like this. And so they were really cool. Like, I wish I had them now, kind of thing. And I used to just sit on the maps, and they were, they could hold my weight quite easily. And I would just sort of explore the various places, like places I wanted to go. My dad, we used to go deep sea fishing with my grandfather. He would have to take Dramamine because he would get seasick, right? And, he had problems on planes and all these things, motion sickness. And, he said that he was going to take me on a safari, right, because it's something I want to do. But at some point I realized that wasn't going to happen. Like if a trip from Connecticut to New York City, was filled with stress and crisis, like there's no way he would be able to go to Africa or India or something. But of course, years later, I went to India for a different reason, right? Multiple times, and traveled in various places. So that was sort of a long introduction to this part, the introduction to this video that's going to tie into the Pat Tillman story and some other social dynamic things that are going on. And so in the back window to our house, I've dug a little pond that the cows can sit in when it's hot in the summer. And the pond has a lot of activity. Of course, there's frogs and things, but lots of birds. And there's orioles, which I love. I think orioles might be my favorite bird. I like the color orange, and just they're interesting looking birds. But we get lots of different kinds of species of birds that go through the backyard. And then we have these hummingbirds. And the hummingbirds we had last year was a couple, a male, like red-throated or red-breasted hummingbird, I think it's called. And he has this spectacular, in the bird world, the male species is much more colorful and, much more, attractive to attract the female's attention. And then the female has a green back, but a very, sort of plain throat and chest, right? This year we put the hummingbird feeder out a little bit later than usual, and the male wasn't there this year. So the past 2 years we saw a male and a female, but this year we had one female that came, and then at some point another female came, and the cows we have cows in our backyard, and behind the house there is our central air unit, and Coco is the heifer. The heifer is a female baby cow, and she is in the phase where they like to butt everything. She's we got these big rain barrel type of things, plastic barrels. She's moved many of them all around the yard. I had a big garbage can that we were going to plant some big trees, like an avocado tree, in our greenhouse that we haven't used yet, but it's sitting out there. And she's it's a really tough big plastic garbage can, and she's been knocking that out around. I mean, she's done all kinds of damage. And she was getting into the central unit. So this year I put a fence so that she couldn't get in and wreck our, heating system or an air conditioning system, because they rub up against these big cows. And on the fence, the hummingbirds would sit and they stare up at the hummingbird feeder. And, they can kind of see people in the window, so you can get kind of close, but not really that close. And so 2 days ago, I went out there, and these two female hummingbirds were both sitting on the fence. And one of them has claimed the hummingbird feeder for hers. And she violently chases off the other hummingbird. It happens so quick because they're, hummingbirds. But there's these two little cute hummingbirds, and the one viciously goes after the other one, right? And they're indistinguishable. I just know that one's dominant because I've seen it. And I was watching this, and it happened so quickly. I didn't have my phone on me, but I would have gotten a video. You'd be watching a video if I had of this exchange. But I've seen this over and over in nature because animals are very territorial. And when they get a feeding ground or they get, a claim to something, they will fight off other animals of their species and then, other animals in general. Another thing that I've noticed this year, I've seen it before, but really a lot this year, is that we have red-tailed hawks out in our pasture area. There's lots of red-tailed hawks and birds of prey in this area. And these red-tailed hawks have made a nest on these giant sort of power lines that are near our house. And they fly over our field quite a bit. And we have a natural field. It's a pasture, but we don't cut it for hay. We're eventually going to move our cows out there. And there's a lot of natural flowers, and it's become sort of a meadow and a place where our bees can go and get food. And there's lots of birds that have created ground nests in that area, lots of birds that, we'll see red-winged blackbirds, which are a cool-looking bird, and we have meadowlarks and some of those like dove. I don't know, there's some sort of a dove, and they are, some of these birds have ground nests or nests in this area. And when the hawks fly over, these little birds like harass the hawks and peck at them. Like we watch them, and the hawks will scream while they're doing it. And the hawks are much physically bigger than these little birds, but these little birds are more agile. And the hawks will land on these power lines, these big, there's two wooden posts that have these, these big power lines. They're very tall, and they'll sit up there. And the little birds will sit on the power lines and wait for them to fly, and they'll harass them again to keep them away from their young and their nests until the hawks go away. And so you see these kind of things in nature all the time, where there is a pretty brutal fights of course, there's the food chain, right? And, the way that animals deal with being eaten and predators and things like this. And so that's, they're a very vicious part of animal life. Brutal, right? And there's a pecking order. Like you notice this when you have a farm. Of course, they call it a pecking order, where some chickens have a more dominant position and they get to eat where, other chickens have to move out of their way. They get the best eating spot. And we saw this with our cows. Anyways, I just had to take a break and I looked it up and I took a little video of the ruby-throated hummingbird. That's the name. But the cows have a very brutal sort of pecking order as well. At our old farm, we had our first cow, Pezra. And when we first got the cow, Pezra, I put up a fence. I didn't know what I was doing. Like I don't know how much I learned from what, but maybe YouTube videos. But I put up one of these fences using metal posts, and we bought some, cow fencing at like one of the big sort of farm stores. There's these stores called Southern States and Tractor Supply, and Southern States and Tractor Supply have farm equipment and things like that. And so I put up the fence and I looked at the barbed wire and I was like, wow, that's way too aggressive. Like it just looks, it looks hostile. And it was so foreign to me that I didn't put up any barbed wire. So there was this family that had a cow, and the cow was producing raw milk, which is hard to get and illegal in Virginia where we were living at our first homestead. And we became friends with them, and we bought raw milk from them, and they wanted to get rid of the cow. And they knew we were probably the most likely candidate. They wanted the cow to go to a good family or whatever. But I was a little bit hesitant, like, what do we know about cows, all these things. And I went to a trip to India, by myself, and my ex went like 2 weeks after I got back. We both took trips to India. We didn't bring the whole family. Kids were young. And I went to this gathering, and there was this cow just sitting there on this cement block. There was rural land at this, there was some sort of like old school that somebody donated to the Heartfulness Mission. Some rich person in India. I guess the guy ended up quitting and taking it back or something. But it was in this rural village area in India. We took some sort of train there, and there was this field, and a lot of these fields there are just dusty. They're just, there's nothing growing on them, and they have like sort of a red clay topsoil, and then they come in and plant something during the rainy season, during the typhoon season, and things grow, the crops grow. But during the rest of the year, it's almost like sort of almost like a sandy desert. And this cow was just sitting there in the middle of this compound. It was all sort of cement. It was sitting on cement. It was just happy. They threw some hay in with it. And we were talking about getting this cow back home in America. And I went up to the cow, and there was just something that passed between us, right? There was a connection there. I called my ex and said, oh, yeah, tell them we'll go get the cow. Like I just knew it was the right thing. Like I had this experience. And so we got this cow, and I put up the fence, and they dropped off the cow. And the guy knew about farming. And he was like, where's the barbed wire? And I'm like, I don't know. I didn't. And so we came out the next morning, and the cow needed to be milked in the morning. And I came out the next morning, and there was no cow in the pasture, right? It was gone. And I found where Pezra, our first cow, squished the fence in a very brutal way and went over the top of it. And across the street from us was this sort of nature area. There was a house, and we had these neighbors who we ended up, not knowing. We didn't know them then, but we knew them later. And they had this area of about 30 to 40 acres of woods that was a hunting club. And our cow, Pezra, our new cow, was in this area, right? And so, and I knew that there was always a chance someone was like, hey, I'm just going to shoot this cow, right? We went by this, there was an area at the hunting club, and there was all these, deer carcasses of all the deer they'd killed. I mean, it was like, there was like deer skulls and antlers and things. I mean, hundreds of them. And some of the things had been killed recently, so there was just this stench. And were calling the new cow and trying to get it back home or whatever, because I didn't want to put up barbed wire because I thought it was too aggressive and sort of hostile, you know. But for cows, they need it because cows have thick skin. They have football, they have leather as skin, right? And they're, pretty brutal animals. I mean, they're gentle for their size. They're certainly more gentle than the chickens, but they have a very dominant pecking order. And we eventually there was like a commune near our house, and they had, cows, raw milk that they raised, dual purpose cows, Dutch belted cows that are dual purpose. They can be eaten and they can be milked. And the first cow came from that place. This family bought the cow from them. And then we went back and got a second cow named Phoebe, who was better producer of milk, and it was Pezra's older sister. And Phoebe was the dominant cow. And then they had two baby cows, heifers, which were named Clover and Fiona. And what would happen is Phoebe would decide where she wanted to eat. Like if I threw out hay, and she would push the cows out of the way, like bullying them, right? That's where the term bullying them comes from. And what I learned from, these people at this Twin Oaks commune and from the family that we bought the cows, that you had to express some form of dominance over the cows. You couldn't like beat them. You didn't want to make them scared of you or something. You wouldn't abuse them, but you wanted them to know that you were dominant over them, or they'd push you around and they become dangerous and you end up having to put them down, right? Because they're too big. They weigh, these cows weighed 1,500 pounds, right? They step on you, if they step on your internal organs. I mean, you see those, guys who ride bulls and things like this. So you have to be like the bull. The cows have to see you as higher than them on the pecking order, or, there'll be total chaos at the farm, right? We also eventually got this donkey named Bo, and the cows used to push Bo around until Bo didn't want to take it anymore, and Bo would turn around and get on his hind legs and kick him. And the cows didn't know like what was happening because they were used to going head to head. And Bo would go sideways and kick him, and the cows didn't like that, right? Because, Bo had these weapons. But there's there's a lot of, this sort of hierarchical dominance in the world of nature over feeding grounds, over the right to mate, through sexual expression. Like the cows will mount each other. Goats, we had goats would do this as well. And that's a form like dogs mount each other to show dominance, right? And so there's these ways in the animal kingdom that bullying and physical dominance is expressed. And this exists obviously in people as well, right? And so that's important to understand that in human nature, on a lower level, there is power to eat better, to get more resources for oneself and one's group, one's demographic. And it's not based in like one group is the only group based in, their race or whatever. That's not specific to one culture or one part of the world. This is across the human spectrum. There's been slaves in every country in the world. Every race has taken slaves. And I'm not, saying this is a good thing. I'm just stating what's fact, right? That there is an element, a dominant element within the human system where there is, military dominance or physical dominance or whatever it might be. And that is a part of the genetic aspect of nature and animal life on this planet. You see it all over the place. Territorial dominance, right? And it's part of football and it's part of war. This idea of land acquisition and physical dominance and military dominance. And this is, what the human race, our social structure is all about. The royal families, these, kings and queens use military dominance, a thug-like, gang-like culture to impose their will on other people in this colonialism type of activity. And it's easy to say, all right, those people, those white people from Europe, those English people who dominated Scotland and Ireland with superior numbers and superior military capability, that's where all the evil happened. But it's something that went on locally in Africa and the Native American tribes. Some of them lived in harmony, but there was always this aspect of physical dominance and slavery and, all these things that exist all around the world. There were slaves, Native American slaves taking, Native Americans taking other Native American slaves, Africans taking other African slaves, and then all throughout the Middle East and China and these other countries, they had all these, this is something that exists, right? Slaves exist, the idea of slavery and the idea of physical dominance, and, one group of people imposing their will on another group of people. This is, human beings want to think of themselves, whatever, modern human beings, but this is, how your country was built, no matter where you are. It was built on this sort of, imposed will and dominance, and one demographic and group imposing their will on another. So I want to segue into the Pat Tillman part of this video, and the other video clip. I have a movie trailer to get to. And then the sportscaster Maria Taylor's, one of her Instagram videos she posted, which is important to this narrative. And then I want to contrast this animalistic aspect of human dominance, human territorial dominance, the lower nature that focuses on the superficiality of a person, the color of their skin, their sex, the region they're from, their, religion, all these types of, identifiers that people have to be in one demographic or another that are based in outward, superficial, lower level aspects of a person's makeup, and contrast that to the higher nature that's available in the heartfulness meditation that I do. This higher nature that exists within people, the soul, the subtle bodies, your spiritual essence, that is not, it's not a demographic. It's not based in your appearance, your superficial outward appearance, right? And so the story with Pat Tillman, going back to this idea of territorial dominance. And what you have is a brutal culture, a gang-like culture, a thug-like culture, a warlike culture, right? You go back to the barbarian days and, what happened in someone like Genghis Khan, right? And these various sort of tribal thugs, right? That create a kingdom and then eventually an empire, like happened with England. And so you had these robber barons, these brutal, warlike tribes that established dominance all over the world, right? People who were predisposed to violence and aggression by the force of their arms and their, their weaponry and their violence and whatever it might be. They were able to impose their will on a village and then, a larger area of cities, and then creating cities, and then, states, and then eventually a country, a kingdom, and then a world empire, right? In terms of the robber baron kings in England, there was a time where the sun never set on the British Empire. You can still say that today because now it's the British Commonwealth. It's a little less savage, but it's still there, right? And you have with America, you had European powers of England and to some extent France and Spain, Spain and South America and Mexico and France and Canada, and then England here in America, that came in and imposed their wills on the native peoples, which we all know. That's historically what happened. And there was this pristine land in America that the native peoples, they were great stewards of the land. They didn't leave any sort of a footprint. And it was filled with resources, more fresh water than any part of the world. These massive trees, chestnut trees on the East Coast, redwood trees, and all these other types of pine trees and old growth forest trees that were just growing without human beings harvesting them. And then all the other, farmland in the Midwest and, the central part of America, and just all of it, right? It was just this incredible, pristine, abundant place. And then, people came from all over the world. Of course, there was slave labor, right? So you had incredible free land, in a sense, conquered land, and slave labor. And that's what made America into what it is today. The wealth that we enjoy is based in, this type of attitude, this, brutal, exploitive attitude of dominance, warlike dominance over various peoples, the native peoples that lived in America, and then the slave labor that came from Africa, and then there was the, already pre-existing hierarchy in Britain where there was these indentured servants that were basically slaves from different parts of Europe, and then bringing in poor immigrant people from Italy and Ireland and then all these other countries, China, and bringing these people over to do manual work over the, in the 1800s and these various times that were looked down on, right? So I'll come back to that because it's part of my, my ethnic makeup, right? And what happens is you have these thugs, these brutes that establish dominance and they create wealth for themselves. And the empire that was very warlike and very brutal and very savage eventually becomes more sophisticated. Like you see with the British royal family, where they get cultured and they, want to be considered gentlemen, and, these women that are, sort of above pristine and just, with all these manners and etiquette and, all these different, silverware. This fork's for this spoon's for this, right? You're supposed to wear this sort of attire. I mean, you can see this in the show Downton Abbey and these other, historical pieces that talk about the British royal hierarchy and their, culture and their etiquette and trying to be above it all and being educated and sophisticated. And they're, basically ashamed of their past, right? And, it's not their past. It's still there, right? There's, their military dominance. And now, of course, America's the military dominant force out there. But how, they came upon this wealth. How all of us in America enjoy this lifestyle based in the abuse and the brutality of territorial exploitation. And so in America now people are educated, they're growing up in suburbs, they don't deal with that type of violence, right? They don't deal with the reality of the animalistic aspect of human life. They benefit from it. We all benefit from colonialism. No matter what your demographic, the spoils that are available, the resources that are available in every Walmart, come from colonial exploitation and all these things, right? The currencies, the value of American currency, the dollar being the world reserve currency, we all benefit on a material level from this brutality. But we don't want to think of ourselves as that. Now we want to think of ourselves as heroes. So every brutal culture, every, thug gang ends up rewriting history to make themselves look like they overcame the bully, right? They were being bullied. They were being victimized. And they overcame the bully. And they are now champions, heroes, superheroes that put down bullies all across the world. And the American people would never accept, and the American culture would fold if we had to confront, why we have the lifestyle we have. The military-industrial complex. I have this meme somewhere where it says, I'll show it right here. It says something to the effect, I have to find it, but, I assume I'm going to find it. And it says the dollar used to be backed by this, and it shows gold, and now it's backed by this, and it shows the naval military vessels. It's because now our dollar's backed by our military and our military-industrial complex. And our very lifestyle, the thing that they call American freedom, when George Bush says these people across the globe are wanting to take your freedom. They're after your freedom. What that means is they're after your lifestyle. Those wars that we just saw in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya, and Egypt, these police actions, and Syria, and eventually they wanted to get to Iran. All these Middle Eastern wars were supposed to be about protecting your freedom, which really meant your lifestyle. Because without these wars, your lifestyle would disappear. But in the nationalistic aspect of America, we're number one, USA, right? The chants that go on. They can't tell you the truth, that we're the aggressor, that we're the evil empire, right? We're the, dominant force. America is. America is, going after other people's resources and other people's stuff to support, our lavish use of not only resources and lifestyle, but just, all of it. You have these mentally ill people who are running the system, who hoard billions and trillions of dollars of resources when other people in the world are starving. They have, more lands and houses they don't even go to, right? And not just houses, castles and mansions. I mean, the royal family has 6 castles and lands all across the world that they never even go to, right? They, could be used for other people in the local area, but they hoard all this stuff. There's, a legion of hoarders at the top of the system. And, it's a system where hoarding is encouraged, and it's a very evil and, going back to this idea of bullying, right? And so they can't tell you the truth. And so this is where the Pat Tillman story comes in to play and just what happened in Afghanistan. So here's the Pat Tillman story. You can watch it on this HBO Movies. It's free on YouTube. And you just, search this title, the Tillman story. It's well worth watching. Again, I'm not recommend things, but for me it was well worth watching, especially at this time of the collapse of the Afghanistan war. It was released in 2010, I believe. I think it's 2010. I just looked it up. And that was 11 years ago. And this is when the whole lie about the Afghan and Iraq wars were exposed by this story. And we can see it now. There's Pat Tillman, and, it starts off with, there's Pat Tillman's mom, who is very central to the movie. But it starts off with Pat Tillman and going a little bit over his football career. So football has deep ties to the military, right? There's military recruiting, commercials basically at football stadiums where there's flyovers, a military presence. The military is thanked. They give tickets away to military families and military, personnel, because football is basically the closest sport we have, which is about war, right? All sports are in some ways about war and competition, and an animalistic dominance over territorial dominance, where there's land acquisition in football, where you march down the field, right, pushing your way with these massive human beings on the offensive line and the defensive line, battling over the line of scrimmage. And this is, a metaphor for war. And it's such a pro-war sport. And so there's ties to sports, especially football and war. And back in World War II and World War I, famous athletes, mostly baseball players, because that was the number one sport in America, quit their sport and went to war to act as, there's this patriotism and warlike culture in America that was viewed that we're the heroes, right? Even though America had the most dominant military, certainly in World War II, you can make a case that Hitler had a very comparable military, but Hitler was the enemy, and the Nazis, Germany was the enemy, and they were doing bad things and all over Europe and dominating these countries. France and England had invaded the Native American peoples and the peoples in Africa, and they had, established this colonial dominance, right? So they had nothing to complain about because now they were being invaded the way they invaded other countries. And so they were seen as the victims, and America was going to be the hero and rescue England and France from the tyrannical German Empire. But, all these countries are empiric, right? America had its own, history of violence and bloodshed and slavery and all these things, which we know about. There's no heroes, in terms of countries, right? It's whatever side you're on you think is heroic. And so these athletes went over to fight in World War II. But then something happened in the Vietnam War where Americans lost, there was the hippie movement, and there was this counter understanding that this war, which was anti-communism in Vietnam and pro-opium, because there was lots of opium grown there, right? And so like Muhammad Ali, for example, who was maybe the world's number one athlete at the time, or was going to become that, decided to go to jail rather than fight in Vietnam, which I, to some extent agree with. And so the American people would not want to be viewed, America be viewed as the villain, right? This is, contrary to the narrative that we're the villain, we're exploiting other countries, and the wars are lies, right? This is part of the Pat Tillman documents that the family was given, and that there was, lies at the basis of these wars that were now being created on a global basis, but certainly mostly in the Middle East. That America was never a victim, that these wars were intentional and necessary to keep the economy going. And American people would never accept that, right? They would never, believe that that was the case. And the government does its best to put out these lies and propaganda to keep up this illusion that America's helping these countries all along the globe, all around the world, from, bullies, right? We're freeing them from bullies in these regime change wars. And so the Pat Tillman story exposes all of this. It should have been a huge news story, and it has everything to do with the way the Afghan war ended. Pat Tillman was a football player who played for the Arizona Cardinals, and he was a throwback to the days when these A-list baseball heroes and players, American heroes, threw down their lucrative careers as an athlete and volunteered to go over and fight for their country. And so Pat Tillman, who, saw what happened, the big event in 2001, saw America's way of life being attacked by these foreign evildoers, as he thought of them, decided to do this, to forego his lucrative football career and become a soldier and fight for his country. And this is a narrative the American government and military really wanted. They pushed this narrative. They rode the back of Pat Tillman, who was a hero, right? And, was somebody who was sacrificing and giving up wealth and privilege to go and fight for America and this country. It's something that used to be, a big part of the American culture, but it's sort of faded. And with this big event, so many people being outraged by this big event, they had, this new person to focus on as what America is all about. And so they loved this narrative. But he became disillusioned in the war, right? And so he was clearly seeing that the war was a lie and the way they fought it was a lie. And he was, a well-read person, a thoughtful person. And he was, against what America was doing. And he felt deceived like so many soldiers over there. This is a Harvey Weinstein movie, by the way. And so he was killed by what was considered fratricide, which is friendly fire, where other American troops were responsible for his death. And they knew this immediately. All the people that were with him, one of his close friends over there was with him when he got shot by fellow soldiers, and he had to come back, and they told him to lie to the Tillman family. They told him, all these guys that knew what happened, they immediately covered up that Tillman was killed. And the gunfire, apparently, they took off his head, I guess, at one point they talk about in the documentary. And I'm not going to go through all the details, but there's layers to the lie and cover-up. That the information was suppressed at the highest levels of the government in the Bush-Cheney administration, Don Rumsfeld. They all knew about it. They told the family a lie. They created this story that there was this, that he was this hero that was killed by the enemy. And then there was all this celebration of his death to act as a recruiting tool and to promote this war that he knew was a lie and a joke. His brother also, who was there in war, and they fought together. And so this was, it was so many layers of deception and evil lying and manipulation by the military and the Bush administration, and even to some extent by the media, to cover up what really happened. And the covering up goes through various stages, and the family finally gets a congressional hearing, which they're just shaking their heads and they're outraged by the cover up and the lies told by Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Rumsfeld, and the rest of these, neocons and people that promoted this war, which is a lie from the beginning. They get into the Jessica Lynch story, if you remember that. She was a soldier who they said fought bravely and was captured by the enemy, and she had like broken limbs, and he was supposed to be a part of the rescue because they wanted to bring him into this, right? Patrick Tillman. They want him to be a part of this rescue, which was a complete farce. The official story was Jessica Lynch fired like she was, the Tomb Raider or something on the enemy as she tried to save her fellow soldiers who were being killed. And then she was captured and tortured and held in a very secure facility. Jessica Lynch never fired a bullet. Her captors put her in the hospital, and they could have walked in instead of putting special forces and got her out of the hospital, but they waited till a camera crew showed up, and they told this lie, and then the lie came out. And so there was two major lies where they created these false, heroic acts that were, just fictional. And so it just tells you everything you need to know about the war, because if they'll lie about Pat Tillman and the way they treat his family, the way they lie to him and manipulate them, there's this document dump where they give her boxes, they give the family boxes of redacted materials, hoping they'll get tired and they won't seek the truth anymore. But the mom's a teacher, and, Pat Tillman tells a story about how she was last in the San Francisco Marathon, but she, gutted it out, right? Somebody who, doesn't quit. And the family just went after it, and they just wouldn't back down. And the government just came up with new stories and new cover-ups. And, they had a fall guy, one of the generals they blame, who, was just following orders. And it's just so greasy. Because the truth is, there aren't really heroes, that we're invading other countries because of our military-industrial complex. And this, and there's just all these lies and manipulation of the American people who deep down don't want to know the truth, right? Deep down, Americans don't want to know that they're supporting an evil empire. That, it's based in this animalistic, aggressive, land-dominant, all the things I talked about in terms of the animal kingdom. People don't want to hear that. They don't want to see dead bodies. I mean, they talked about, these various people who sent pictures back of Americans in, American coffins. They didn't want any of that. They didn't want people focusing on the death, the level of propaganda and lies. And if they're going to lie about this, what wouldn't they lie about? If they really wanted these wars and pushed for these wars, which we know over and over again, General Clark, that guy I showed you that he came across, he went back to the Pentagon. He was the leader of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at some point, and he went back there, and then the guy said, hey, there's going to be 7 wars in 5 years, that they were using this event in 2000. I mean, without this event, they can't do it. So, what does that say about the event, right? What does it say about any of it? Like the whole, all of it is, once you lose trust and you'll lie about someone like Pat Tillman, we know now that how the Afghanistan war ends. And in 2010, when Pat Tillman, when this documentary came out, the Obama administration and Biden could have watched the documentary, which I'm sure they did. They all, like Donald Rumsfeld sent Patrick Tillman a personal letter and told the generals to watch and, watch over this guy. He was special, right? In terms of American propaganda and the American, what the American illusion that somebody like this, they need to exploit as much as possible. And then Donald Rumsfeld said he didn't recall finding out when he, they were watching this guy over the whole course of his military career. They want to milk as much out of this, the military-industrial complex, as they could. But Pat Tillman realized the war was a joke, that we all realize now, right? I realized back then, like people just wanted to get some payback for what happened. Americans were victims, right? American system was under attack, and we needed to go out and kick some ass. And that was, all these movies that you saw growing up at the time and all this rhetoric they put out there was, leading to this inevitable outcome. But what the government doesn't want you to know is that Patrick Tillman wasted his life, right? He fought a war that was based in lies. His death was preventable tragedy. I mean, it could have been said they even murdered him. Who knows, right? I mean, who knows? They're liars, and you'll never know. But he was killed by his other fellow American soldiers that fired upon. They are part of the same group. They were a group that split up in these canyon areas. And some of the soldiers I don't even understand why we split up. Didn't make any sense. And so this one group fired on the other group. His brother was a part of the group, but he was left back. And they immediately told him to lie to him, right? They burned his uniform. I mean, all of it. They got rid of all the evidence. They started covering it up as soon as he died and manifested this pro-American military lie that, using Patrick Tillman's, tragic death. He was somebody who was, loved by so many people in his life. They had, all these great things to say about him. Somebody who was, a giver in the sense of, wanting to contribute, and then realizing he'd been deceived. At one point, he slipped a document home to his wife. Then he said he checked the box that he didn't want a military funeral. And as soon as he died, they came to the wife's door and tried to bully her into having a military funeral in, D.C. where they could celebrate his death and, all these, his sacrifice, right? And it sacrifice on every level of what that word means. And she said no because, he had said to her, they're going to try to do this. He worried they were going to use his death. He had this premonition that they were going to try to exploit him. And he didn't trust the military, so he took a copy of this document where he checked the box no when it says, do you want a military funeral? The family was really upset at his funeral. I mean, John McCain got up there and said Tillman was in heaven, right? John McCain, that slime bag, because he was from Arizona. And his brother gets up there and said he didn't believe in heaven. He was an atheist, right? They were upset by the way that this narrative was going and the way they were exploiting their loved one's death. And so it's evil on so many levels. And then, going back to the whole reason for war and all these things and the exploitation, right, of the American people and lying to them about these wars and the way these wars have now ended. And like I said, Biden and, Obama and Hillary Clinton, they were a part of this period of time, and they could have righted the wrongs of the Bush administration and came clean. But instead, they went and re-upped with the whole Arab Spring and these illegal and immoral wars in Libya and, all these other places. And without those wars, our economy would have collapsed. And the American people can't handle that and don't want to know about it. And so, all of us, right, no matter what your demographic, we're all benefiting on a material level because of the military-industrial complex and this exploitation of people. But in the past, where you could just go over and conquer a country and say that they were animals in that country, they were savages, and that you were bringing them Christianity because, they're going to hell without it. I mean, that's one of the old reasons, in the past, when countries would go over and subjugate a people, they were subjugating savages and giving them a higher level of culture. This is what was, sold to the soldiers. And for your, rewards for bringing them the Christian religion, for bringing them modern technology, was their enslavement and taking their resources, right? But that wasn't, people weren't buying that anymore. So now we're going over to oppressive places and getting rid of bullies all across the globe. And they were all out to get us and attack us. And, and this is what American people believed, and many of them still believe. So I want to segue into the trailer of this movie and this sportscaster, Maria Taylor. And I just want to preface this, that when I have to fill out a form, when it asks me my race, I have to check white or Caucasian, even though I'm ethnically Italian, Irish, Albanian, and German. So, I have darker skin, I tan, right, because of being Italian and being, somebody who's gone to the ocean quite a bit in my life, right? But on the inside, I don't identify with white people any more than any other group, right? I'm a loner. I'm an outsider just based in my internal world. I never fit in, being dyslexic, being introverted, being, whatever spiritual capital I came down with from previous existences. I've had past life memories in India. I believe I was a Native American maybe a couple of different times in past existences, at least one, and who knows what else, right? Probably, lived in Africa at one point or another. So internally, in terms of various demographics, there's not ones I fit into. In the Heartfulness meditation, which is the one I would most identify with, because it's an internal condition. I know people from all over the world. The headquarters of the Heartfulness meditation in India, you'll find people from every continent, right? I've met people from Vietnam, I've met people from Romania and Kazakhstan and countries I can't even pronounce, Australia and Madagascar and various places in Africa, and Danish people and French people and English people and Italian people, and from every European country. So people from the Netherlands and other countries, right? Canada, Mexico, Haitian women, that were the preceptors for my mom. People from South America and Iran. I mean, all these various countries, Russia and the Ukraine. I mean, so many countries I can't even list them all, right? And internally we all have a similar desire to evolve spiritually. That's what brings people to the Heartfulness system, whatever our egos are, whatever our personalities are. But even in that group, I'm sort of an outsider. Not sort of, I'm an outsider and a fringe person. There's not so many truthers that do the Heartfulness system. It's like 10%, probably, like anything else. And then, in the truth community, because of doing the Heartfulness system and being a different kind of a dude, right? I am, a fringe person, of course, a fringe person on YouTube, an outsider, a fringe person in America. It never really fit in, right? I mean, sometimes I fit in and sometimes I don't. Sometimes I feel, a connectivity with other people that goes beyond the superficial aspects of our external world. And sometimes I feel completely lonely and unconnected, or like looking around going, what is going on? Like, there's something wrong here, right? And so I have these different internal conditions, but I don't identify with the power structure, the so-called man. You have these, white men, particularly, the demographics in this country, 70% of the people are white. So you have an overwhelming population majority of one race, one color of skin. But white people aren't like, when other groups look at white people, they see them as one group. But in terms of, you had these English white men, they were the ones who were most dominant, right, in terms of the building of America, the Anglo-Saxon white men, so-called WASPs, and they are a specific group. And they subjugated the Irish and the Scottish people and looked down on them, in terms of their hierarchy. I mean, that's what the English were sort of good at. And when they came over to America, there was some French and some Spanish, but it was mostly dominated by England. This was an English colony. And eventually, when there was no more slaves specifically, they brought in immigrant labor, and specifically Irish and Italian people came over. Then there was Chinese as well in the 1900s. And they were viewed as less than. So my ancestors, because I'm part Irish and part Sicilian, were viewed as less than. And the Irish and Italians actually competed. They live in the same neighborhoods. There was, rival gangs and things like this, right? And you saw these other demographics come in. And so when people think of, white people, my experience as being a white person, like there was some, derogatory thing said to me, like, you're Italian. Like, people looked at me in my high school, some of the other white people, like I was less than because I was Italian because of my last name. But really, I was like, really? Like, I'm not Italian. Like, I don't know anything. I once in a while go to New Jersey and see my Sicilian relatives, my grandparents and their extended family sometimes, but I don't know anything about it. My dad didn't really speak Italian. And so, I mean, I was American at that point, but I saw that, I wasn't part of the club, right? A club I didn't want to belong to, so it didn't matter to me. And so I just want to preface that, because what I'm talking about here, this is a feminist movement, and then what Maria Taylor says in her video clip, I'm not looking at it like I'm losing something, like I'm a part of some, white male exclusive boys club, because I'm not, and that I want to preserve the culture because I don't. Like, I never really liked this culture and always sort of looked down on the American dream in America because I knew there was lies. Like, it was easy for me to accept these things now, these narratives, because I always knew there was something off and something deceptive about the American culture. And so I'm not denying that, the prominent power positions were filled by white men, European white men, Jewish white men in America, right? You have, a group of people who are mostly white men who are making the majority of the decisions about America. So I'm not saying that isn't true, because it is. So I understand that there's a backlash there, and maybe it's something that, it's probably, definitely something that is divine in nature. Like, things come back around. So there's legitimacy to these movements. I'm not saying these movements are illegitimate and people don't have a gripe, but the way they're going about it is fundamentally dishonest, and I'm going to get into that here. So this is a movie called A Wheel of Time by Prime Video on Amazon, and here's the trailer.
Be strong.
It starts with one woman pushing another woman off of a cliff, and she dives into the water. And this is
wheel
going to
of
be
time
about
turns.
This is going to be about women power.
And ages come.
So you see these men laughing here. They're laughing, white men laughing, which, they don't get to do anymore, because this is, check your privilege already.
And ages come and pass, leaving memories.
Stop crying, white man. You have your privilege.
That become legend.
Become legends.
The power
Then there's this dude.
inside you.
The power inside you. That's woman power, and you have power. This is, there's these narratives. Let me go through this here.
All over the world, there are different names for it. But it's
There's a council of women there.
one thing. One power. And women who can touch it.
There's one power, and only women can touch it.
We protect the world.
And they protect the world, the women power, from the white man. And the white man's arrows, their pointy phallic death sticks that are coming towards these women. Boom. She just paralyzed their phallic death sticks. Don't shoot your death stick. Check your privilege.
The Dark One is coming for your friend.
The Dark One. What does the Dark One look like? The Dark One is a bunch of women. There's the Dark One. There he is. This long-haired white dude who looks a little bit like Jesus. Or, the Jesus that we know. Not the real one.
The last battle is coming.
Look at these demon soldiers.
The only thing that matters.
Those white demon soldiers. She's got to team up with this Asian dude to defeat the white man and his privilege.
This is what you do.
Whatever happens now, there's no turning back.
Oh, wait, there's that dude. Look at this dude. Definitely Caucasian. He's got some sort of parasitic mouth here. Some devil horn guys. She's got the power. She's gonna generate her female power. Slay those white men and denut them. Denut those MNFers. The Wheel of Time. November 19th. So, just to understand this, we now see there is a trend in Hollywood that over, when I grew up, Caucasian men, white men, many of them Anglo-Saxon, various, versions of white men, were the protagonists and the heroes in 90% of movies. They were centered around men, and they were centered around, this, old school, great, make America great again type of culture. And then there was the Me Too stuff and all the woke stuff that happened. And they've shifted this. So now the movies are women-centered and LGBTQ-centered and people of color-centered, and the white man is often the villain, right? The white man is, portrayed as either weak or flawed or less than in these movies. And, now you have all these groups that are so-called protected groups, marginalized groups, that now have the power to write their own movies. And I like different things. I like new things. I like unique things. I like things that aren't, the same old storylines and plot lines. I mean, there's hundreds of Romeo and Juliet, rip-off movies or, whatever it is, right? These action films, they're all, they follow a template. And I'm into new things. I like new things. I like something different. And they haven't produced any, right? The majority of these movies is white man bad, and these other groups, whichever's featured in the movie, are the heroes, and they got to defeat the white man. Like, this is, it's a very remedial storyline, and it's not factually accurate in various ways, and I'll get into that in just a moment. So let's go to Maria Taylor here. So YouTube recommended this to me, and I think I might have seen it before. This is maybe from a month ago, right around this Maria Taylor and Rachel Nichols, whatever it was that was on ESPN. So I looked at it. It was 8/21, so it was roughly about 2 weeks ago. And it was 3 days or 4 days before Rachel Nichols was fired, so that's interesting, from ESPN. So it almost, if she had insider information that they were dumping Rachel Nichols and she put out this video, which is entirely possible, then there's some gloating, right? This is a gloating video.
Hey, black woman, I just wanted you to know that you're pretty dope.
You're pretty dope, she said, right? So I want to be clear about this. Obviously, if you know me or my videos, I don't get offended by what other people believe, right? People have the freedom to do inside or think inside what they want and create what they want. I mean, that's between them, their soul, and God, and it's none of my business. And, her opening statement, it goes on from there. We'll go through it. I'll show you what she says from there. But let's just cover this opening statement when she says, black women, you're pretty dope. And that's the demographic that she believes in and identifies with, based in her race and her gender, right? And what she's saying is, she's separating black women from everybody else, and I've talked about this in other videos. When you start getting super self-conscious about demographics and dividing people up and talking about it constantly, the color of people's skin, gender, whatever it is, their sexual orientation, and all these things, all these various so-called protective groups and other groups, and when you demonize one group and you constantly are demonizing one group or multiple groups, and different groups are dissing each other, and everyone starts identifying superficially with their periphery, the external part, because I'm going to contrast this in a bit with one's with a rich internal life connected to God, like I always talk about, what's inside of you. When you lose sight of what's inside of you and you start saying that one group, the group you belong to, is better, well, that's just going to cause problems for everyone. It's counterproductive. It isn't going to help you out. You saying that is only going to make things worse for everybody, including your group, most of all for your group. And you're saying this across the board. Let's listen to it again.
Hey, black woman, I just wanted you to know that you're pretty dope.
So you're pretty dope because of the color of your skin, not what you are internally. And, that is in contrast, because when you say something like this, you're pretty great, it has to be measured against other demographics, right? So if this was a white man saying, hey, white men, I got something to tell you. You're pretty dope. You're pretty great. You're saying that in a way that's compared to other groups, right? And that wouldn't be allowed. There wouldn't be some famous white dude coming out and saying this. If somebody did that, he would be canceled because it's wrong, right? This is wrong behavior and it's wrong thinking. When you focus on the differences between people, especially in some demographical way, and you compare them, or you pump your group up, and you say, just because of the color of your skin, you're dope. Just because of the color of your skin and your gender, you're pretty dope, right? You're saying that every black woman is great, which isn't the case, right? I mean, that's to say that they're all the same, right? They all have the same beliefs. They all have the same, dopeness. They all have some dopeness just based in the color of her skin. And what she's saying this because she's a part of that group, she's really talking about herself. There's narcissism here, which you're going to see.
Like, I don't care what society tells you. They might tell you that your skin's not pretty enough, that there's not enough shades to match your makeup.
Well, first of all, this is pretty superficial. Second of all, I've never heard either of those things. I mean, I'm not privy to the world of makeup. But again, this is something superficial. And, I mean, every woman suffers some sort of, based in their body type, based in the color of their hair or the skin, their skin tone, or the kind of skin they have, or their features, or whatever it is, right? Women are constantly feeling attacked, and they're told by the makeup industry and all these other clothing industries they're not, they're less than. Every woman has this to some extent because so much is stressed on their physical appearance. And again, this is something superficial and, not really all that important given everything that's going on in the world.
That although all women make 82 cents to the dollar on white men, you make 62 cents. They may tell you that you don't deserve that promotion, even though you do. They may tell you that when you get the promotion that you only got it because you were black. But we know that's not true. I just want you to know that I believe in you. So
this is why this, her Instagram or her TikTok video here has made it into this video because of the hypocrisy. And, I talk about this all the time. If you're against a behavior, you're against the behavior. You're against it in all forms. It doesn't matter who's doing the behavior. It doesn't matter which group or which demographic is doing the behavior. If you're against nepotism, in this segment, she starts off by complaining about the, unequal pay gap between white men and women in general, and then black women even more so. The disparity in the amount of money that they get paid. And I've heard this to be controversial, and it's not, borne out factually. I know there's different arguments about this idea of the wage gap. And I'm not concerned about that in terms of this part of the video. But what she's complaining about is white men, and this whole woke culture is complaining that white men have most of the power positions and the better jobs, which is true. I agree with that. This is, again, a country that is 70% white, and white people were at the foundation of America, especially Anglo-Saxons, white English people, and then there's other groups that have risen up to higher levels in power and position, right? Some of these other demographics, and their complexion is for the most part white. So I agree with that, right? And white people hiring other white people and promoting white people over other people, I agree that that happens as well. Because that's how, when people identify with a demographic, those things happen. And it's a human, trait. You go to any country in the world, and based in religion or ethnicity or the color of your skin, whatever group that is dominant, whatever group holds the power, And it could be your belief system. I don't know what it is, right? But people who identify with the power group, and the power group sees them as, one of them, they have a better chance of getting a better life, right? And America is actually a lot better than other countries. It's a lot worse in other countries. But the problem is then she says something that's factually untrue, because she says, she's talking about her situation, and Rachel Nichols saying that she got the job over Rachel Nichols. If you're not familiar with the story, Rachel Nichols was a longtime host on ESPN. Well, if you go back farther than that, when I watched football and sports as a kid, there was no women involved. Like, no women. Like, women weren't there. 70% of the viewers of sports were men, and women weren't a part of it. Then they hired this Southern former Miss America, Phyllis George, for eye candy for the men and give the woman somebody to identify with, and she became a part of one of the NFL pregame shows. And then they brought in these sort of, smokes model type, sort of babes that would be sideline reporters in football games and basketball games and things like this. So women started to eke their way into what was considered a man's world and, the broadcasting teams. And then they started bringing in as experts the last 10 years, women who played basketball or former coaches who would sit along with the professional broadcast person, right? There's the guy who calls the game, and he's someone who has a degree in communications and works in TV or radio or something like this. And then they have the experts, the color commentators, that are ex-NBA, ex-NFL players or coaches, and they provide the sort of expertise. This is how they set up the announcers at a game, right? A professional media person and a former professional athlete or coach or something. And so they started to bring women in to that part of the sports world as well. And Sports Center, they started to add women. They started to bring in more of these, alternative demographics. They started adding more and more people of color. And so the NBA, has two major networks, TNT, that has a pregame show with Shaq and Charles Barkley and Kenny Smith, and they're the experts, of the former players, and Ernie Johnson, who is like the professional broadcasting guy. And, it's a very popular show. Like, I don't watch any of those shows, don't really care for them. They used to have a blonde girl on ESPN, and she was kind of really annoying, and, I didn't, watch those shows all that much, but found her sort of, really unpleasant to watch, right? Just something about her. They got rid of her, and they had this girl, Rachel Nichols, who was a little bit annoying, right? And, she was better than the other girl. But I have no way to evaluate it because it's, to me, not really much of a skill. I mean, it's a skill, but it's just like the officials in a basketball game. You don't really notice them if they're doing a good job, right? Only if they're annoying, only if they screw up, you kind of notice them. And so, again, I don't watch the pregame show. I fast forward through commercials and foul shots, and, in football, between plays, I fast forward. I try to cut down the amount of time. I watch it just as some sort of nostalgia. But because of the BLM stuff, the Black Lives Matter stuff, and athletes protesting and all the stuff to do with Trump, that Rachel Nichols was called into the office by ESPN, and they said to her they were going to replace her with Maria Taylor. And it seemed based in, because then Rachel Nichols had, a conversation when she was really upset, and she was in the whole hotel room at the bubble, at the NBA bubble, and she left her camera on, and all the people back at ESPN saw her having this conversation, and she basically said that ESPN has had a long history of issues where they haven't hired women and people of color, and that she had to fight her way into this position. And she was going to cover the NBA Finals, the NBA Championship, and now she was getting booted even though contractually ESPN had said that she would do that, right? And, she was upset she was being replaced. And, what she indicated based on what she said, I covered this before. It sounds like ESPN basically told her it was because of Maria Taylor's race, which is a thing now, right? You can see it. I mean, it's something where it's harder to hire white men right now, right? Everyone can kind of see it. This happens, there's these various programs that have been around for a while, affirmative action here in America. They have it in India with the caste system. I was talking to a young practitioner of the heartfulness meditation, and he's from the Brahmin caste, and he said he had to change his name and basically lie about what caste he was in when he was taking these tests for job placement. They do a lot of testing in India, and he had to score so high, almost an impossible score, to compete with the so-called lower castes in India because they were trying to rearrange this with various types of these programs. So there are times that a person who is less qualified, that comes from a disadvantaged group, and that's happening a lot now, is going to get preference, is going to get the job over somebody who's in the dominant caste or demographic or whatever it is. That happens. And it happened to some extent in this case. And I don't begrudge somebody taking an opportunity if the winds blow a different way. I don't, care that Maria Taylor took this job that she was given specifically, at least in part, because of her race. That she was given preference. They booted Rachel Nichols, and they put in Maria Taylor because, maybe they thought she was great. Maybe they thought she was a star. Maybe they thought she's real talented. Who knows? But one part of it was because of the BLM and because of NBA players and all of this stuff. It was partly because of her race she got this opportunity. And she's fundamentally lying about that, right? I mean, she's saying this in this video. Maybe, she's great at her job. I have no way to evaluate it. Maybe she's even better than Rachel Nichols. But the reason ESPN, basically stabbed Rachel Nichols in the back, again, I'm not a Rachel Nichols fan, don't care about it. Like, I don't have any, they're both gone from ESPN now anyway, right? ESPN's owned by Disney and all of it. Like, doesn't affect me one way or another. But Maria Taylor's being dishonest here, and she's not, being factual with herself because she's saying she's against nepotism. She's against people getting hired because of their race or religion or their gender or whatever, their sex, whatever you want to call it, right? And she's saying that she's against that, but she's not, she's not unhappy now that it's happened to her, right? That the winds have blown in a different direction. And then she was in this sort of great position renegotiating her contract with ESPN and got a lucrative deal with NBC Sports because of it, right? And so this is fundamentally dishonest. She's complaining about the discrepancy between what white men get paid and what women and women of color get paid. And then she's denying that race played any part in her success and her, being in the position she is now.
You got it because you were black. But we know that's not true. I just want you to know that I believe in you. So resist the urge to fall in line and don't be humble. Girl, brag.
People love it when you brag. Right? People love it when you're not humble and you brag, right? That always goes over well, no matter what demographic you're in. People just love it when other people are bragging and not being humble. I'll come back to this because it's an important point.
They may tell you that when you get the promotion that you only got it because you were black. But we know that's not true. I just want you to know that I believe in you. So resist the urge to fall in line and don't be humble. Girl, brag. Because you are so fine. You're the only one that can do what you do on a daily basis and never say boo-hoo to anyone.
Are you serious? You don't have the ability to self-perceive? This whole TikTok video is you doing a boo-hoo, right? This is a boo-hoo TikTok video. You're complaining. There's victim consciousness. I mean, it's braggadocious. It's all of those things.
You're the only one that can do what you do on a daily basis and never say boo-hoo to anyone because you are the one, the black woman that's stronger than everyone.
And then it said here, yeah, I said it, right? As she poses at the end.
To anyone because you are the one, the black woman that's stronger than everyone.
All right, so this video is already an hour and a frickin' half, so that's a problem. It was not what I was hoping to accomplish here. And so I want to get into the positive stuff and a couple of comments to read and something I haven't talked about. It really contrasts with all these other things that I showed here. Just a couple of things to wrap up here. Where she says at the end that the black woman is stronger than everyone and everyone else, basically, right? That's not going to help things out, you know? And then she says, yeah, I said it. Like she just threw down the gauntlet, but it's, you know, it defeats your whole argument. Because the argument that white people had was that they said they were the superior race. They had the superior religion. They, you know, whatever Darwinian theories they had, whatever reason that they thought it was okay to go and subjugate other people, enslave other people, in terms of the European white people, or any group of people, because there was slaves, again, in Native America, there were slaves in Australia, there were slaves in Africa, there were slaves in Asia, there were slaves in India, there were slaves in the Middle East, right? Every place around the world had slaves. I mean, there's some small little pockets of, you know, gentler cultures. Slavery's been around a long time. It's a part of human behavior, unfortunately, but it's, you know, it's there. And it's always a belief, an internal belief that people in one group, in any group or every group, think that their group is better and superior to other groups. And they should have special privileges and special treatment. She's talking to a very generalized group, right? So we're talking about millions of African American women, millions of black women in America, and I don't know if she's going beyond America. In Africa, then you're talking about hundreds of millions of black women, and she's very specific about how just based in their gender and their skin color, and I guess, you know, to some extent their culture, they're stronger and better than other people, than other demographics. I mean, she's saying that in this video, which is the exact behavior that the woke culture has against white people, that, you know, white people do. When white people arrogantly conquered countries and enslaved people. I mean, this is, all right, this is an evil behavior, but if you have the same behaviors and the same attitudes that create those behaviors, then stop whining, right? Because it's whoever ends up being the strongest and grabbing the power position is going to be an oppressive, and again, the lack of humility, which I want to get into, her saying, don't be humble. Well, arrogance creates oppression. And like I was saying about these two little hummingbirds that are fighting over territory, which is a big part of the mammalian model, I know that all these demographics, and you can see it right now, these various demographics that now are getting more power, they're being promoted, they're being protected by social media and the powers that be. These demographics are see an opportunity, and I don't begrudge anybody taking these opportunities, right? I mean, again, I don't agree with the behavior. I don't agree with the attitudes. But, you know, people taking these opportunities because now the winds of change have shifted and flipped things sort of upside down, at least in appearances. But I know that they're going to be just as oppressive as these other groups. They're just replacing the so-called man, the white man, with women and, you know, feminists and LGBTQ members and people of color. It's just going to be a different face, a different complexion, but the same behaviors, right? You can see it. They're going to, you know, embrace this bully role, this abuser role, the same way. It's already happening now. And, you know, it's short-lived because it's going to end up being a numbers game at some point in terms of demographics. And, you know, and in the end, everyone's going to be taken down because, you know, the economy, right? There's no money left. This is not like the pie is going to be split in different ways now. There is no pie. And I said this to the NBA basketball players when they were protesting. They were complaining about abusive and oppressive behaviors, specifically to do with the police. But I pointed out that LeBron James and many of these basketball players have lucrative contracts with Nike and maybe some technology businesses that have sweatshops exploiting people around the world, oppressing people of various demographics. None of them had problems when Obama ordered Libya to be, destroyed and Gaddafi to be destroyed, which has created a gang-ruled, horrific situation in that country, right? Where that country has been, decimated and looted by the Western powers, which was, the same sort of colonialism that all these so-called woke people complain about, but they didn't complain about when their guy Obama was doing it, and Biden was a part of that, and Hillary. And so it's hypocrisy because they're not against the behavior. They want to be on top. These various groups want to replace the so-called white man, right? Because that's just, human nature, unfortunately. And so just by usurping the powers that be, it's the, look at the new boss, same as the old boss from that Who song. And so, that's all going to play out and you can see it for yourselves. I'm just pointing it out, right? My track record on these things have been very consistent. I think before you see a complete flipping of the power structure, it's going to be taken down because the people who control the system, people like the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and the Queen and, the royal family and these real power players that rule from the shadows, some of them, the trillionaires of this world, they're all white, right? They're just pitting everybody against each other so they can grab more power and control. That's all going to play out in whatever way. I just wanted to point out about the Patrick Tillman thing that there were so many ghouls, all these guys in the military, and just the way they handled this and lied about and covered it up so many times, you can just see it's like watching a ghoul fest. Like I've never seen so many ghouls. I meant to point that out, but if you watch the movie, you can see for yourself, and it gives you, everything you need to know about Afghanistan and these Arab Spring wars. Actually, there's two more points I want to say before I move towards the solution and the opposite of this type of attitude and behavior. One of the things that I saw with Rachel Nichols that was annoying, and you also see this with Maria Taylor, and pretty much anybody who's in an announcer role, especially on ESPN, they have a lot of women hosts, and the guys are often, angry and have an attitude, and they get into arguments. It's this format of drama, but the female hosts are usually fake and are smiling all the time and really, really positive, right? And it's fake, and it's hard to watch. And you see this with both Rachel Nichols and her, she was all positive and she was all, always smiling and happy and sort of giddy when she was on TV. But when they took away her hosting the NBA Finals, she wasn't so positive then. Everyone on TV has a fake persona. You see this with Maria Taylor as well, but it's very competitive. Sports is competitive, and sports broadcasting and journalism is competitive. And you're competing, and culturally, like Kobe Bryant bragged about his killer instinct and how to dominate other people, right? Dominating on the court and crushing your opponent and all the rest of it. And that's a big part of American culture, and pretty much every demographic embraces it. And I believe it to be an American flaw, worldwide flaw. Competition is okay, especially when you're young, but at some point you mature past it. And then you're more, you have to take a more collective and inclusive and humble path, which brings me to the solution part of this video. That when you start having a relationship with God, it humbles you. How can it not, right? If you stand next to the ocean and you look out at the vastness of the ocean, it humbles you, right? You go into the ocean, it knocks you around, which is what happens when you have a relationship with God. No matter how great you think you are, how dope you think you are, or, how wonderful your ego thinks it is, that you get humbled. It's inevitable. And part of the process is that no matter how great you are, when you have a relationship with God and your soul, you become better. And so, I've learned that in terms of what I do here. No matter what I contribute to this YouTube channel, my personality, whatever my, perception, whatever abilities I have, natural talents, if I wasn't connected to God, if I wasn't, doing the heartfulness system, which helps accentuate and facilitate the relationship with the divine inside, this YouTube channel wouldn't be a fraction. These videos wouldn't be a fraction as good as they are now. So I want to illustrate this with a few comments, 2 comments that I saved and another one which I remember. And so the first one, this person writes this: "It's amazing how every time you talk about something, it's either what I'm currently going through or just having conversations with God universe about it in order to understand it better. Then you just say it out loud in your video. It makes me smile and I suddenly feel peaceful, a sort of confirmation from above that I'm on the right path. One of those beautiful, subtle signs we get from other people in nature, events to remind us we are safe and loved. Thank you and have a blessed day." So this is something very prevalent in the heartfulness meditation. It happens to people who don't do heartfulness but are sincere followers of God and, even in religion to some extent. But in the heartfulness system, it's just so much more in tune, right? That, for example, I saw this over the years, there would be a reading from the heartfulness literature after the group meditation on Sunday and Wednesday night. And then, every day in the ashram there would be group meditation. So in Chennai, India, there were 3 a day. One, I believe, at 9 or 7, I can't remember, early. And there was one maybe before lunch, I can't remember. It's, it's kind of sad. And then there was one at 5 o'clock at night or 7. I don't know. But there was 3 a day. And then on Sunday there was one, and that was in the morning, and then one at night. But the one in the morning would have like 5,000 people. The other ones might have 100 or so, depending on if there was a big gathering going on or not. There'd be more. And so there would be readings, right? But in general, there would be a reading after the Sunday group meditation, and then on Wednesday night, they usually had a group meditation as well. And so many times I heard, and probably the other times it happened and I didn't hear, that there was somebody who was struggling with something. They were looking for guidance. They were praying for an answer. And then the reading would speak exactly to it. And I'm sure a lot of you have felt that on this YouTube channel, right? Where I say something that, you're asking God in some way, or you're going through some internal process, maybe looking for guidance or an answer or confirmation, and you hear it on this YouTube channel. It happens so much in the heartfulness system. And of course, I can't know that. Like, I'm not aware of what you're going through and really don't care, right? I'm not really even interested in it. And yet somehow, because of my connection to the heartfulness system, it's a vehicle for such things, for answers to come to people, right? And this happens so much in the heartfulness system. There's a connectivity that is, there's so much confirmation you get because you'll be thinking something and then you'll see it. It might even be in a movie. It doesn't even have to do, with the, heartfulness members, but the answer will come. When you pray in the heartfulness system and you're looking for guidance and you're asking God for, some information or something, an experience to help you understand or do what you need to do, it just happens in ways that in other systems, because of the lack of the transmission and the connectivity, you'll get it, but not in such a very, I guess a powerful way. So here's the other comment that I was able to save. These are from like back-to-back days or on the same day. I can't remember. The Daji meditation today was late. I think they forgot to stream it because I was sitting watching a video around 6:15 California time, and I suddenly felt the transmission and couldn't help but to go outside, but they only started streaming around 6:40 my time, and when the stream started, he was already halfway through the meditation. Yeah, I saw that as well, that the video had started in the middle of the meditation. And so this is a good sign, and it happens to people, especially after you do it a while, that you feel the sittings. Like I can feel the sitting before it even starts sometime, if I'm really attuned to it. When I'd be driving to group meditation, especially at a gathering with the master of the system, I could feel the transmission coming. And then I found out that Master Charji, and I'm sure Daji does something similar, he would sit by himself before giving a group meditation, like the Sunday one specifically, or at a gathering, and he would feel the sitting, and he'd understand it before he gave it, this energy that flows through him. Again, there has to be a humility here because it's beyond the human ability to, do such things, right? And, if I was late for a sitting or, there were times that I was with other people and I could feel the sitting going on before we got there, right? And sometimes transmission just comes. Like I'll wake up at 2 a.m. and I'll have a powerful experience, and it won't be with a preceptor. I'm not, meditating with, somebody giving me a sitting. I'll just wake up and there'll be this amazing transmission. I mean, this happened a lot in my first couple of years of doing the practice, where I would feel transmission, and I don't know if a preceptor was working on me. Sometimes the master of the system would, just work on people. Babaji used to see little faces in bubbles. Like he'd close his eyes and there'd be bubbles, and he'd see faces, and they weren't necessarily practitioner seekers of the heartfulness system. They were people out in the world, and he would transmit to them for a few seconds, send transmission to them, and whatever, with this idea, whatever they need would be taken care of, because for whatever reason, it came to his attention. To go with this, there was a viewer who left a comment maybe about a week or two ago, and I meant to comment on this, and it's a good time because it goes along with these other two comments here. And the person said that she played the videos, I think it was a woman, played the videos for her husband and her family, my videos, and they just can't get them, right? And, she couldn't understand why. The person couldn't understand why, but I understand why. If you ever see The Field of Dreams, there's a lawyer, and he's kind of that obnoxious guy. He was on one of those drama shows. I don't know, L.A. Law, I don't know what it was. And he wants to sell the farm, and he can't see the angelic baseball players. You guys remember the movie Field of Dreams. And he can't see them. And the ball's like going by his head, and the other people see him, and he just doesn't see him. And then something happens, and he sees them. He's like, what are all these baseball players doing? And that's how these videos are. That's how the heartfulness meditation is. It's only seen by the people who are given permission to see and are willing to see for themselves. So it's two things. In some cases, people are blocking themselves. I mean, they all are, because the heartfulness system's available to everybody, right? But there are people who just tune into these videos and they see something different, right? They feel something different. They look forward to my videos. I mean, it's a small number of people, anywhere between 1 and maybe about, could be up to 10,000 people. I don't know. In terms of the comments, I would gather it is probably maybe 5,000 people that watch all these videos, and there's something special for them in these videos, beyond the jokes, beyond the insights. I mean, it's a very Field of Dreams kind of thing where people are driving there and just watching the game, and it's working on them internally. That's how the heartfulness system works. They don't know why they're there. They're not even sure. They get in the car and they drive out in the middle of Iowa, to go to the Field of Dreams. And that happens in the heartfulness system all the time. There's I won't call it magic to it, but it happens on another plane of existence, and you're taken care of and you're guided, and there's a reason why you come across this. And there's also being a part of a soul family. There's having maybe a past life with me in this case or something, or, There's, or even if it's not here, there's some sort of spiritual connection on another plane of existence. There's some familiarity, right? There's souls from different places. That's why when you look at racial demographics and, people in countries and, whatever it is, like I can find people like me, even if I don't like them personally, their egos, their personality, there's a resonance there. There's a connectivity. I can find people like me in every demographic, in religions or even atheists. There's people who have a similar, they play a similar role and they have a similar personality configuration. And then there's people's hearts. And you might not like a person, but your hearts could be very similar. And that's how it is in the heartfulness system. I don't have a lot of friends or people I, want to hang out with that do the heartfulness system, especially after, everything that happened with my divorce and things. But we have the same, our hearts are similar. We have the same sort of inner compulsion towards the divine. And there's these soul families, and sometimes people just, especially now with the internet, you can connect with more like-minded, like-hearted people. Like-hearted is a better way to say it, that are from a similar part of the etheric universe, who have a similar resonance with you. And so there's lots of people that just don't get my videos and never will. That's the long answer to this. And they're not meant to. This channel is protected and hidden, in various ways. That's one of the reasons it's kept on going here. Because, there's just some part of that in the heartfulness system. That's why I don't worry about the numbers or the subscribers. I certainly want quality, and not quality in the sense that people are better than other people, but people who resonate and get it, right? People who benefit from this and understand it. And so, and the heartfulness system is even more so like this, right? The people who are, invited, and everyone's invited to some extent, but some people more than others. And so there's a couple more stories here. I'll just end it with this. So there's a couple stories where Master Charji, one time he was out in the middle of rural India. And, he was Babaji's disciple. He was secretary of the mission, and people knew who he was. And, he was a big-time corporate executive, and he was out in northern India somewhere near Babaji, or maybe I'm not sure where it was. Like, he lived in southern India, but he traveled up to northern India. And he was doing something for his business, and they were lost. And, this is before before GPS and, all these things, cell phones. And also it was India, so you're in rural India. And, you go out to rural America, and sometimes GPS just doesn't, come close to giving you the right directions. And so they were, really lost. And he sees this guy, right, and they're in the middle of nowhere. And this guy comes up and he's weeping, right? The guy is, he's like completely falling apart. He said, he was praying to Babaji for a sitting, right? He was praying to the master of the system, Babaji, for a sitting. He says, I recognize you. You're the secretary of the mission. You're a preceptor. Please give me a sitting. I'm so desperate for a sitting. And somehow, in this, warped situation, like Master Charji ended up in this place. This guy's heart pulled him there to give him a sitting, right? And this has happened more than once. There's another story, and I can't remember it exactly, but Master Charji was driving around, and maybe it's the same story, and they had been in this place time and time again, but they ended up completely like, this is the part of the story, and they ended up, like 500 miles away from where they were supposed to be. It didn't make sense, right, on a, a physical level. And this happened to me, and I'll tell a story about this as well. There's another story, and this is a story I was told by a trustworthy European practitioner, an old-time preceptor, somebody who said that Daji told this story to people in Denmark. And again, it's not official, but I believe it to be true. And so when Master Charji was made the master of the system, the successor, the spiritual representative of Babaji, there was a lot of people that wanted to hurt him or kill him or were against it, right? It was, there was lawsuits, and he was poisoned, and a guy showed up to shoot him. And apparently Dodgy was someone who was upset at Master Chargy's selection. Again, I'm getting this secondhand. And he was young. He was like 18. And he was in a car with some guys who wanted to go over and shoot Master Chargy. And I believe he was at Babaji's house in Shah Jahanpur. And so they were driving to his house, and they had been to Babaji's house hundreds of times, right? Even Dodgy, who was a new practitioner. So he met Babaji when he was like 18 or 19, when he was 18 years old. And I think Babaji passed away when he was 19 or 20 or something. And he saw Babaji a few times, right? But not, he was young. And so they're driving around, and Shah Jahanpur, where Babaji lived, is rural India. And maybe there was a couple of thousand people in the town, and, about 5 or 6 dirt roads. So it's not some complex metropolis, right? It's not like New York City or something. And they're driving around, and they can't find Babaji's house. And they're going around in circles, and they turn around, come back around, and they're going through this small town, and somehow they can't get to Babaji's house. It's like they're caught in some loop. They do it for like hours. And finally, Dodgy, who was like, a young person, says, "Stop and let me out of the car," right? He had this, like, if you ever see that movie Boys in the Hood, he said, "Let me out of this car," right? And then, of course, he became Master Chargy's primary disciple and his spiritual representative as well, right? He became a future master of the system. So, it's interesting, that story. And so I had, a similar story to this. And when I came back from India, we were in a extensive trip that we were in and out of India for about 3 years. We were in that part of the world. Me and my family, I went through this divorce, and my family went through so much. 3 of my kids started the meditation, and there was just so much. Like I can't even think about all the things. It was just a very intense experience. And we came back, and we lived in the Las Vegas area. And, when I first came back, I hadn't driven a car in 3 years, and I didn't have a car. And, the first day I had to just get a bank account, right? And so I walked down. It was hot out. We got back in May, and, it gets really hot in the Vegas area. It gets like 110, 115, 20 degrees sometimes in the summer. 115 usually is like the hottest. And, it was over 100 degrees, and the sun was intense. But I walked from my apartment down to this credit union, and I opened up a bank account, and I bought some, like, stuff and food. I took an Uber or something like that. I don't know what it was. It was just getting everything together. And so, eventually I was able to buy a car. But there was this one road that I recognized as sort of my primary street. So whenever I move to a new place, I make a mental map, I think most people do this, of the roads, right? And there was these roads that I first learned about, the road that my apartment was on. But then there was this road, it had a woman's name, this street, and it was the road that I learned to navigate all the other roads because it cut across, the major sort of intersections in the place that I was living in. I've been waiting to tell this story for years. I never, my wife was even wanting me to tell it. So I always remembered this street. It was one of the primary, directional beacons that I found. So about a week later, I was able to buy a car, and it was an old Toyota van, and it ended up crapping out. But, I was driving around and learning the city, and I got onto this street with this woman's name, and I drove down it, and somehow I ended up on the other end of the city in the opposite direction. And this is the time that people were talking about this Mandela effect kind of thing. There's another story, too, I should tell. I'm going to tell this about Master Chargy. So Master Chargy was really depressed and distraught. And this is when Babaji was still alive but older. And he was in Italy. Master Chargy traveled on business to, various countries. And he was just feeling really low, and I don't know what's going on. And he went to the balcony and just, he was in this really depressed mood. He looks outside the balcony, and he sees Babaji driving by in like a horse and carriage. and he like looks right at him, and then just keeps on going down the road, right? And Babaji was in India, and he was really old and couldn't travel, and and he just had this stunning experience, almost like an hallucination. But he swore that it was Babaji in physical form, right? And there's been these sort of things that have happened, and I've told some of them that I know about, some of the things that happened to me. So I'm driving down this road, and I end up at the other end of this street, this road that has a female name, and I knew where I was, right? There was like a Goodwill over there. It was one of the first places I went. But the direction I was going shouldn't have had me end up like that, right? And so I later, went back there multiple times and tried to recreate what I did. Like I got on this one road and I was going like west and I ended up east, right? And I was like, this can't be possible. Like it's like the fabric of reality. And since I was new to the place, when it happened, I was sort of like, wait, this shouldn't be. But later on, when I really knew the roads, and this happened, like I drove back like 3 months later, I kept on trying to figure out, I'm like, why did this happen, right? Why did I end up on this other end of this street that I knew about, where I should have been on the in the opposite direction? And then a year later, I met my wife, whose name was the same name as a street, right? And so that was, the story itself without that was interesting to me. I never talked about this as, back in 2016, so this is 5 years ago. But there are things like that, that happen in the heartfulness meditation that, the fabric of reality, the material reality is shifted. Like I've seen it happen. I know that other people have talked about this. It's like, this is some sort of video game and they can rework the video game when, it's appropriate. Anyways, only spirituality will save this world. It's Paramano. Definitely reporting from the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.